Hello students, I'd like to welcome you to CET1178 A+ certification hardware. My name is Professor Kemp and I'd like to take a few minutes and give you a summary of some of the content that we're going to be going through and cover in this course. Okay, first I'd like to mention that this course is a sequence of the first of two A+ certification courses. This course, of course, being CET 1178, and the second course is CET 1179, which talks more about software. Both those courses combined together help cover all the information needed for an A+ certification that you can take at any testing center, Pearson VUE Testing Center. And it's two different tests that you take, and once you pass both those, you would have an A+ certification. Now this course here, CET 1178, covers fundamentals of digital electronics, computer hardware, and operating systems. It helps prepare you for an entry-level computer position. As you see here, it says with at least 6 months training, but there's some other things that can take place in that sometimes you can get right in, and they'll give you some of that experience with their own training. But definitely having the A+ certification will be beneficial for you in trying to find a job in computer technology. It's also a lead-in this certification and the content in this course for other courses that you may want to take and other certifications. As you see there, the CCNA, Network Plus, and Security Plus, among other certifications that are out there. And if you wanted any other information, you see the website I give you there for CompTIA's website for the A+ and the certification procedures and things about the exams for this course. Okay, so starting out here, we're going to be covering 14 chapters in our textbook, which is going to be furnished through Skillport, so there'll be no cost to you on that. There's a digital copy and ebook on Skillport that you'll be able to access all this information and read the book from there. The first chapter talks about safety and professionalism. Some of the things that you see in that are you see me bulleting here some of the things that they want you to learn in this is proper appearance in a professional manner in your workplace, whatever company that you wind up with. How to talk to customers in a professional and productive manner, and then discuss the tools of the trade and preparations necessary to deal with problems proactively. So they're going over, the fundamentals of what you need to know to how you handle yourself, present yourself, and represent whatever company you work for in a professional manner. And now, after we go through chapter 1, we'll come to chapter 2, and this is a chapter called the visible computer. And in this chapter, we're going to look at some of the things that you actually can see in a computer. So how the computer devices will work, you see here. Common connectors, a USB cord, how the mouse and the keyboard is attaching. Is it through a cable or is it USB? Things like that you would connect to the machine. And then some common features of the software operating system. Okay, that will be followed by chapter 3. We start getting inside the computer and looking at one of the most important parts of a computer, and that's the CPU. You see here is a picture of a CPU going into a socket on a keyboard, on a motherboard. And so some of the things about the CPU that we'll learn in that are some of the core components of a CPU, the relationship the CPU has with memory, a variety of modern CPUs, there's all different kinds, selecting and installing a CPU, and then troubleshooting the CPU if you run into any problems. So this will sort of tie in, after this chapter, this sort of will tie right into the RAM, the memory that we have in a computer. And in that, we'll see about the different types of RAM packaging, the varieties of RAM, how you select and install RAM, and perform, again, some basic troubleshooting with memory in the system. Okay, so after we've talked about the CPU and memory, there's a thing called the firmware. What's the firmware? Well, the firmware is what we commonly refer to as the BIOS. Okay, so we explain the function of the BIOS. We distinguish between various CMOS utility setups. Now, these are all things that you would interface before the system would boot up into the operating system. When your computer first boots up, there's certain keys that you can push to get into the BIOS, and these are where we can do some different settings for your machine to run. We also describe some options from the ROM and device drivers for the system. We talk about troubleshooting, because sometimes you have boot up problems and you may have to troubleshoot some of these and see how they are. A lot of this information will lie in the BIOS. And then how to just maintain the BIOS and CMOS properly, so you'll have a more healthier machine with less problems down the road. Okay, the next piece of hardware that we go into is the motherboard. This is actually the biggest piece, right? Because everybody interfaces and attaches into the motherboard of your machine, and you can build on it from there, add different devices, upgrade, things like that. So on the motherboard, let's take a look at some of the things we're going to look at on that. How it works, how the motherboard works. Recognize some of the modern expansion buses. Upgrade and installing the motherboard. And there's our troubleshooting again, troubleshooting the motherboard. And yeah, there are different things that can happen that sometimes you got to take a look at with a motherboard. And there's different methods and different things to look for, and that's what we go over when trying to fix any kind of motherboard issues. Okay, so the next thing, none of these devices that we've talked about so far would be any good unless we were able to supply power to it. So the power supply does that, and it furnishes all the power that the actual hardware and the computer needs to run. And so in some of those things, the first thing we like to always start out with, because we're talking about power, we're talking about electricity, is just some of the basics of electricity that you should understand. This is an electrical class where the whole class is spent on electricity and things like that, but there are some basics that you need to know and make sure you understand. You describe the details about powering the PC, how to install and maintain power supplies, and yeah, there's troubleshooting, but also fire safety if there was ever a fire. And so it talks about some of the things, if that happened, how you take care of that, and what type of fire extinguisher are used for certain things. That there are different classes of fire extinguishers that are used depending on what type of fire it is. But they just go over some of the basics of that. Okay, so our next step in Chapter 8, we're going to look at mass storage technologies. Mass storage technologies. So, in mass storage technologies, we're dealing mostly with hard drives. We want to explain how does that hard drive work. Identify the interfaces and connections that they use. Remember, there's different types of hard drives, as you'll see in this chapter. We have a regular old SATA hard drive. Now we have these SSD hard drives. So the interfaces are a little different in that, and there's some different features and some benefits of one over the other in these. We also describe how to protect data with RAID. Now RAID is an acronym for trying to protect your data in case something goes wrong with the machine. If you've got all your data on a hard drive and that hard drive goes bad, how are you going to get that? Obviously you should be backing up and things like that. But there's also other things that you can do when you have multiple hard drives in a machine, where you can, if one of the hard drives went bad, we can refer to the other hard drive, and it has all that same data on it, and keep up and running in our machine until we go out and replace the other one. But that's what, and there's different types of RAIDs, different types of ways you use hard drives to protect yourself in this. And then actually, installing the hard drive. That's another area that we'll take a look at in that chapter. Now in chapter 9, we're still talking about mass storage, the implementation of mass storage, and in that you can make different partitions. You can have you have your C drive most of the time where your operating system is, if you're in a Windows machine here, but you can have a D drive, you can have an E drive, you can have multiple partitions on one drive, and we discussed some of that. Formatting options on those drives is another area that we take a look at, and then both together, partitioning and formatting those hard drives when you set up your machine. And then obviously there's different things we can do to help maintain the health of that hard drive, but also you'll run into from time to time some troubleshooting issues on it. So you see a lot of troubleshooting takes place, and when we go over each one of these parts, because you want to be able to prepared and have the knowledge to know the steps of what you would do to fix certain things, and like in this case when you're dealing with the hard drives. Okay, and then chapter 10, some of these essential peripherals. Well, keyboard and mouse would be an essential peripheral in one of them, so those are two examples, but other things we will look at too. So how to support multi-purpose connectors. There's different connectors that you can connect into your machine. You can connect printers, you can connect USB sticks, external hard drives, all sorts of things. And we need to know how we can identify and install those peripherals on a computer. And we also need to know the storage devices that aren't SSD or HDD in their media. So other than hard drives, what about some of these other things? Again, like I think I mentioned before, a USB stick or a printer or different things that you can connect into the system with. Okay, so by this point, when we reach chapter 11, we've gone over all the essential components of a computer. Now we can start talking about, hey, what about if you want to build one? So in this chapter we go over different things we can do to when we're installing, some things to think about, what kind of machine we want, how much money do we want to spend. You see here, research and spec out specialized PCs. So you got to ask, if you were doing it for yourself, okay, what do you want this machine to be able to do? What are you going to be doing on it? It'll give us an idea of how we should spec it out, the parts that we're going to need to take it, and also give us an idea on budgeting for these parts and building that PC. Of course, when we put the PC all together, now we've got to install and upgrade an operating system. In this case, we're mentioning Windows. So we're going to put Windows 10 on it, we'll say. And so how do you go about doing that? And then finally, post-installation best practices. Some things. Okay, we put the machine together. We've installed the operating systems. Now, what's some things, some good practices and things we should do next before we even start doing things and using that computer? What kind of post-installation tasks can we perform to help ensure that computer runs better, and also what programs I want to put on and things like that. Okay, this takes us into chapter 12, Windows under the hood. Now I know your machine probably doesn't look like that, but that is under a hood. So this is what we're going to do, except there's going to be a computer there. All right. The registry. So when we're looking under the hood, the registry is something that is a mapping of everything that you've done, every configuration in your machine, and this is done in an interface that takes you to a place called the registry in your machine, where it's got everything labeled. Now, to have a knowledge of that would help you sometimes in a troubleshooting situation. There's a registry error or something in the register got corrupted. Also, understand and observe the Windows boot process, see what's going on there. we'd sort of go through that boot process and what kind of things are really happening in that boot process. We break that down. Manage some of the processes and services and threads. So once the machine's up and running, there's a lot of other things running. There's many programs running in the background. We've got to make sure that they're okay or they're not causing any problems. So we can take a look at where to take a look at that and what to do in certain situations. And then finally, explore some of the tools for programmers in this last thing in this chapter. Some of the things that can help us troubleshoot or just monitor or check different things in that machine, in that operating system in Windows, that'll help us out. Okay, so next chapter 13, users, groups, permissions. Okay, so people have to log on the machine. At home, you could have a couple of people sharing a computer, and everybody wants their profile, their own login name and password for that machine. And if you're in a network, okay, they're going to have what they call a domain name. And so what you like to do when you're trying to allocate resources out to different users is put them in groups. And like, for example, group A can use this printer in our network that's in the main hall, whatever. That's the kind of thing where I've got to tie some permissions in for anybody put into that group will have permission to print from that machine. Different resources on the server. Again, groups are used for that. We create the groups and then we put the users in the group. We define the NTFS permissions. It's a set of permissions and how the different levels of those permissions break down and what they're authorized to do or not do. And you see the last two here. Share a Windows computer securely. So I can share my computer with you. You can access certain things on it. I can set that up, and it could be a printer or it could be a file folder on my machine. So how would you do that? And then finally, securing PCs under a user account control. I'm securing those machines because I'm saying that, hey, I'm going to be using permissions, and you can't not anybody can access that nice color printer that's sitting in the break room. There's only certain people who are going to use that, or else we're going to be out of ink quick. So I need to use what they call a user access control to a certain resource to limit that and just have that made available to those who really need to use that. And then finally, lastly, in chapter 14, we're just talking about maintaining and optimizing your operating system. Again, if this was a Windows 10 situation, some of the maintenance tasks that you do regularly, defragging the machine, for example, checking some things out, making some tweaks to it that make it operate a little bit better, and prepare it for any problems that you might have. You can do things to prevent something from happening. Some different situations where you can make some changes and change some settings on that machine. For example, if I did have two hard drives in a machine and one hard drive went bad, okay, that's okay. I can still keep maintaining and interfacing on that machine. I'm just down to one hard drive now, but I'm still doing the same thing. So there's all sorts of different things, and there's things with the operating systems, keeping your updates and things like that we'll go over and talk about. So after we've completed chapter 14, we've completed all the chapters, and I hope this gives you a nice feel for some of the things that we'll be doing in CET1178, A+ certification hardware. I hope I break this down. Of course, when we get going in the course itself, we're going to break these down even into some more detailed content where you can follow different step-by-steps on things and be able to analyze and troubleshoot computer hardware in a machine and the whole computer operating system. Okay, so thank you very much. Any questions, you can email me at ckemp ccamp@irsc.edu. Okay, so I hope you enjoy the class, and I'll talk to you soon.